Hey yo, it's Willie. Welcome back. So I'm going to be doing a 3-part reaction to Ark Invest's recent Big Idea Summit. Each part of this series will focus on a different aspect of the presentation, including AI, autonomous ride-hailing, and electric vehicles, for obvious reasons. Although I'll only be speaking on these particular topics, I highly encourage those of you interested in it to go check it out because, as the name implies, there are a lot of big ideas worth exploring in the presentation. So in this video, I'll be focusing on the AI presentation by Will Summerlin, an analyst over at Ark Invest. Don't know him personally, but anytime I've seen Will speak, he always comes across as genuinely clued in on his assessments, as do most of the folks at Ark. So with that, let's get into it.
So this year we focused our AI research in two areas. The first is cost declines, and we'll explore cost declines over the last 6 years in AI, and then talk about expectations for future cost declines through 2030. The second area of focus is market sizing, and we'll talk about the overall opportunity for AI and what it looks like today versus what it could look like in 2030. So just jumping in, before we get into the numbers, I want to frame why cost declines matter. And if you look at the adoption of technology historically, cost declines have led to democratization. So the less expensive a technology or innovation is, the more people have access to it. And we see the same thing happening with AI. So typically, the larger a model is, the larger a neural network, the more performant it is, the better it performs. And the problem right now is neural networks are quite expensive to train. And so if we look at something like GPT-3, which is a 175 billion parameter language model, and it's considered to be a top performing model, in 2020, it costs about $4.6 million to train. And that's quite a bit of money. And if we think about research organizations, universities, nonprofits, oftentimes they don't have the budget for that. But with cost declines, it's becoming much less expensive. And so as cost declines, we're seeing more access and creating more availability for organizations like universities and nonprofits. At the other end of the spectrum, well-funded organizations like OpenAI are able to continue pushing the boundaries of what's possible in terms of model size and performance. So as costs decline, they can continue increasing the size of the models and the performance of their models.
Just want to add a bit of context to what Will is saying here. AI training is no different than any other technology in that the single biggest limiting factor in the early stages, and in most cases, is cost. However, once the technology has begun to mature, maybe even become mainstream, the cost of that technology begins to decline rapidly. This is because of how in demand something might be, producers realizing the opportunity that the thing can be a lucrative endeavor, leading to more producers producing. Simple supply and demand.
Again, GPT-3 cost about $4.6 million to train in 2020. If we went back to 2015, we estimate it would have cost about $875 million to train a model of that size. So we saw a cost decline at about 65% a year from $875 million in 2015 to $4.6 million in 2020. And based on our analysis, we think that costs will continue to decline at about 60% a year. So we could see a cost decline all the way down to $500 by 2030. So that's a decline from $875 million to just over $500 in 15 years, which is pretty incredible.
So obviously, if costs of training a GPT-3 model declined from almost $1 billion in 2015, just 7 years ago, down to $500 in the next 8 years, would be bonkers. But there's a section in the graphic being shared that I want to highlight. At the bottom, it says, given 240 trillion synapses, the cost to train a neural network equivalent to the size of the human brain in 2021 would have been $2.5 billion and is likely to drop 60% at an annual rate to $600,000. Now, I'm not sure if people watching this or who watched the actual presentation are aware of how consequential this would be, but just think, today, only a handful of people in the entire world possess the ability to do this. But in less than 10 years, you'd be able to train a neural net for about the price of a mortgage to a shanty house in Oakland. That's wild.
So shifting to the market opportunity for AI, we think one of the most useful applications of AI will be making human knowledge workers more productive. And knowledge workers are software developers, accountants, lawyers, etc. And we did an analysis here to look at the types of tasks these knowledge workers do on a daily basis and try to predict how much AI could improve their productivity. And on average, we think that AI will increase the output of knowledge workers by about 140%. So that more than doubles the output of a knowledge worker, which is really, really exciting for a number of reasons. One of which is that in many of these job categories, like software developers, there's actually a labor shortage right now. If you talk to any large tech company, it's quite difficult to attract and retain software developers. And while it's really hard to just make more software developers, we think that AI could bridge that gap and make the software developers that we do have more productive. So we're very much excited to see how that plays out.
Now, here's where I think people should really begin to pay attention. If Ark's research holds true, that would mean that yes, software developers, accountants, bookkeepers, lawyers, so on, could see substantial boosts to productivity. Their jobs would become easier and in some cases may be able to take on even more work because of the efficiency gains associated with those boosts to productivity. However, if we extrapolate this out a bit, keeping in mind the cost declines that were mentioned earlier, AI will continue to get cheaper, continue to get better, and at a point will outperform the labor of humans at a cost far cheaper than what humans demand. I say this all the time, but this is important. There are many people who denote large sums of money, typically via loans, to receiving a specialized education in a field they assume will lead to a lucrative career path. But just like the manufacturing industry and robots before it, knowledge work appears to be the next in a long line of industries that will be disrupted by emerging technologies. Stay woke.
And it's not a pipe dream. This is something that's real and it's here today. OpenAI has a tool called Codex, which could be thought of as Google Translate for software engineers. A developer can put in an English language command, like make a red ball bounce on the screen, and Codex will actually generate software code, functional software code, that they can use in production. And there are software engineers who are using Codex today in their real jobs. According to OpenAI, it's about 37% accurate. So it can complete coding tasks with about 37% accuracy. But based on the rate of improvement over the last year, we think that that will increase and improve quite quickly.
This example should be eye-popping for those of you watching this that may be skeptical to everything I've mentioned up to this point. But for those of you who don't understand the implications here, a simple way to understand it is this. Imagine a newborn baby. Through the newborn and infancy stages, they're highly dependent on their parents. But as they mature and begin to understand more and more about the world around them, they begin to follow simple commands such as make a red ball bounce around and over time begin making decisions for themselves. Now, if you haven't put two and two together by this point, there's probably not much I can say or do for you, and it's likely AI has already displaced you from your job.
So if we're right, the adoption of AI could lead to one of the greatest periods of wealth creation in human history. AI companies today are worth about $2.5 trillion. And our analysis suggests that by 2030, those companies could be worth, or companies in general, could be worth $87 trillion. And this is a combination of companies building both AI applications, the underlying models and software that power those applications, as well as the hardware and compute that's used to train those models.
Now, whenever I have the opportunity, I always like to admit my shortcomings, accept that I don't know everything, and allow myself to learn, just as I hope you all are doing while watching this video. With that being said, I took the time to look into the term enterprise value. According to Investopedia, enterprise value is a measure of a company's total value. In its calculation, it includes the market cap plus short-term and long-term debt, plus any cash on the company's balance sheet. So again, wanted to take the time to game anyone else up out there who didn't catch what that was. So anyway, as we consider the implications here, Ark is estimating that AI software alone will generate over $7 trillion in enterprise value by 2030. Meaning AI hardware will produce around 8 to 10 trillion, which relative to all of the enterprise value generated over the span of almost 25 years of the internet before AI is obviously huge as well. But I mean, this just shows how much of a market AI is likely to generate in just the next 10 years. Again, stay woke. So, as with most things, I draw this back to Tesla. What does this mean for Elon and company? Well, assuming Tesla is the first to solve full self-driving at some point in the near future, it would appear they have the most to gain from the market boom. Considering the fact they've created such a large gap between themselves and the rest of the competition in terms of their robust collection of real-world data, they're likely to take the lion's share of the enterprise value being highlighted in this presentation. And when I say real-world data, I'm referring to contextual data. How does the software interact with free-moving parts, like other cars and pedestrians, and constantly changing obstacles and circumstances, such as roads and weather conditions? Sure, there will obviously be AI software that will live on typical devices such as laptops and phones, so companies like Apple and Google will continue to have a place in the market. But there's absolutely not a doubt in my mind that the AI software will be applied to devices such as humanoid robots. And if Tesla is a producer of both the AI software and the AI hardware, as they already are, well, then I guess it's game over. That does it for this one, folks. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to do the YouTube thing. Like, subscribe, all that. Also, be sure to find me on Twitter. I'm Willie. This is Charged Up. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.